Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of Westside Tyler Live. Very late today to accommodate the schedule of the person we're going to be interviewing later on. One Dylan Burns, well-known Ukraine war correspondent, native of, I believe, Maryland at some point, but another U.S. guy. He's been covering the war in Ukraine for a while, and we're going to pick his brain about the Kursk. I can't remember if it's a U or an A. Hold on. I have it written down. I took some question notes this time. Kursk. We're gonna be talking about the Kursk offensive into Russia and what's going on, and just a little bit about the day-to-day issues of what happens when you are a war correspondent on the ground in a combat zone. And just for people, because some people are familiar about your work and stuff, but could you just take me quick and dirty? Russia invades Ukraine, okay, a few years back now, and then you have an idea to go and start covering it raw on the ground. Can you take me through like kind of the mentality of that process that got you there?
Well, when the war started, I was covering it, I was talking about it, and I had felt that a lot of people had really estimated Ukraine pretty bad. Everybody thought they were going to collapse in like a week. The Russians did. A lot of Western analysts did. Zelensky was being offered a ride out of the country. And even though that quote is probably not like 100% real, he did stay. And out of all the things, like there's a million critiques you can make of Zelensky. And I've heard a lot of critiques of him, and there's valid critiques. The one thing that I will always give credit to him is he stayed.
Mm-hmm.
And when it comes to like the spirit on the ground, the amount of resistance there would be, some estimations and opining certain realist authors, very popular realist authors made about what would happen in the areas of the country that spoke Russian when the Russians actually fully invaded. All of this ended up to be like complete hogwash. And I thought when I got a decent amount of viewership talking about the war, and being amazed at the Ukrainian defenses and being like, wow, all the analysts say they're falling, but like they're putting up like good resistance, and I was able to get a decent audience. I thought, do I want to improve my coverage by staying here from all this like new viewership I got and the money I did get at the time? At the time, it was a lot of money. I don't make that type of money anymore. Almost all Ukraine coverage. I know so many people in Ukraine have gotten laid off now, English-speaking media, because all the attention has gone on to other issues, the elections around, there's other wars going on.
Mm-hmm.
But at the time, it was enough to either invest here in a better studio or try to improve my coverage by going to Ukraine, was my thought. And I thought that there would be more value in going there and talking on the ground so I can get an estimation for myself, since the analysts don't necessarily always get it right.
Yes.
And I also believe that, and this is something I've taken with time that's been added to it. That was the original reason. I also do genuinely believe that journalism is the first draft of history, and I want to take part in making that draft. And the better that draft can be, the better understanding we'll have of what led to these events, and so how we can avoid things like this again in the future. And that's going to require, if you want to understand this shit, you got to be in the shit. And so I would like to help make that draft a tiny bit better if I can.
And kind of to that, to really hammer it home. Obviously, something happens in Ukraine and it gets reported here. People don't understand that a lot of the times the 17, 18, 20 stations that are reporting it comes from maybe just one on the ground reporter. What would you estimate the size of the like current press corps for the Anglophone world, so to say, in Ukraine? Do you know everybody, or is it actually much larger?
My gosh. I honestly, I think at this point I know a decent amount of them, or at least know people from like every publication. A decent, it's pretty tight knit. I've had like dinner with people once, right? Or like I can like think of a bunch of different people. Like Francis Farrell came to the screening. He's from the Kiev Independent. I know people from New Voice of Ukraine. I know people from the Kiev Post, even though the Kiev Post continues to go through many, many problems, most of them self-inflicted.
Mm-hmm.
So I think I know a decent amount of them. As to how big it is, it's kind of seasonal. For example, like right now, a lot of people have gone home for like vacation. When I did my screening for the Unevacuatables, my recent documentary, a decent amount of people couldn't come just because they were on vacation, they were home, because it was the winter. But people will come in the spring and summer because that's where most of the fighting is going to be, because the front isn't quote unquote frozen. I left for this brief period because I wanted the vacation. Of course, that's when the Ukrainians decided to launch Kursk. So they
Yeah.
did that just to, I think, spoil me
Gotta
mostly.
hurry back now, don't you?
As for the actual size, I really wish I could tell you. I could just read you the name, the number on my military press authentication, and you can take an estimation from that if
Yeah.
that's a lot of people.
Well,
But
and
yeah, I think it's like hundreds. I think it's maybe like in the hundreds, but it's not in the thousands.
gotcha.
And so when you think about like 1,200 kilometer to 1,400 kilometer being like documented by a couple hundred journalists, many of them not even like frontline journalists
Mm.
necessarily. Yeah, it's pretty tight knit. Like when the AFP journalist died, like everybody knew about it. Everybody was really upset about it. When I mean, yeah, it's close, tight knit enough.
And so I want to ask you some questions about Ukraine in the future. But before I even get to that, I just want to talk to, how you do journalism, because you weren't really a journalist. You were a more like, a live stream producer. I was familiar with you from the Hippie Dippy podcast and all of those arguments and stuff, the debate sphere of the day. But you switched over to journalism and hit it pretty hard. Do you have a background in it, or what were the challenges that you overcame as you transitioned into basically a full-time conflict reporter?
I didn't have a history in journalism specifically. I had a deep interest in foreign affairs. When I was still in high school, I went to the University of Maryland to take like specialty courses in international affairs and international relations IR classes. And then I started doing like a little bit of like not a ton of policy wonking, but a little bit of policy wonking for some congressional campaigns, mainly the Michaela Wilkes one, which they don't usually hire like for policy advisors, but I just saw it as a good chance to learn experience. I saw it as a good chance to, get involved in a campaign, and I tried to build my knowledge through that experience. I did my same through the Mike Gravel campaign, even though I disagree with Mike Gravel on a lot of things. I wanted to stop sending bombs to the Saudis, and I always want to stop sending bombs to the Saudis.
Yeah.
I tried to build up as much knowledge as I could, gain as much as I wanted, and then once the war happened, I had a deep interest, and I thought, well, if I want to know the war any better, if I want to display to my audience the war better, and also try to improve my knowledge so I can give better commentary, what better way to go talk to people on the ground who are having to live through this?
And so, speaking to that, how do you kit out? Nowadays you go out, you got a GoPro, camera, notebook, field recorder.
Yeah. Usually my kit right now is I've got 2 plates, front and back, and I've got soft padding on the sides. I want to invest in more soft padding for the groin and the back area, but it's just like a question of budget. I got a helmet. It's a decent enough helmet. I really only need a helmet that should be quote unquote good enough to. Well, it would be best to have the best helmet ever, of course. My main concern is always going to be shrapnel. I'm not really concerned about like getting hit with many AK shots, because I'm not taking part in like assaults in enemy positions. I'll be like 300, 400 meters away. There's the chance of the odd sniper, but the vast majority of the threat is explosives, shrapnel, and I want to be able to deal with that. And so that's where like the defensive kit. I've got a med kit. It's got everything that I would need, including painkillers, which I want the painkillers if I need the med kit. I've got a DJI gimbal mini. I used to have a bigger gimbal, but it was so big and clunky that when I was jumping in and out of cars when something would happen, I remember there was a drone that was spotting us and chasing us in the Zaporizhzhia front, and I had to jump out of a car and jump into the grass, and it just was too big, it was too clunky, and I was getting hit on everything. So I got a gimbal mini with the Sony 6400. They don't make it anymore, but I know the camera well. It's small enough, like if I could get a better camera, a bigger camera for filming, but it's small enough that it makes it much easier for me when running around and jumping around. Eventually, if I ever get a big enough budget to actually have like cameramen and like dedicated cameramen, and I could actually pay for gear, maybe I'll invest in like better camera, but this one's the easiest for me. I know it well, so I stick with old reliable.
Nice. And what's an excursion like?
Oh, and I
go
also
ahead.
have a Starlink in the back in case we ever can't get connected to the internet. So you're welcome, Elon. I'm giving you the satellite tax.
Shout out Elon Musk. Shout out. So what's an excursion like for you? Do you like sit back? You're in Kiev, I never pronounce it correctly, and then you like plan to go out, or do you have like a unit that's just like, hey Dylan, we like it when you come out with us. Do you want to come check this? Or you have an interest and you ask, like, how do you set that up? get out to where you're going to go and like plan on, going out there. I got to feed myself, I got to drink, and then I got to get back here and file.
Yeah, so one of the reasons why I'm so dedicated just on Ukraine, and it's not because like while Ukraine is the one I'm definitely personally and emotionally most invested in, and I spent a lot of time on, and I feel like I know the best. There are other conflicts that I'm interested in. For example, Myanmar. I'm very interested in what's going on in Myanmar, and I've had discussions about like what it would take to go there and film there. I'm interested in still covering the war in Syria because it hasn't gotten any attention in forever, and I think people should at least know about a forgotten revolution. There's some other locations I'd like to do some filming, but I've spent so much time in Ukraine that I've built connections that has made the process much easier. And if I was to, not only as I think I don't want to add too much stress to my family if it's like dealing from this war zone to this war zone to this war zone, and I'm going to be, the threats are going to change, my knowledge of the threats are going to change, who I know is a reliable contact and not reliable contact is going to change. And so through the time I've set up, the time that I've had in Ukraine, it's allowed me to have a process that I find very simple, which is I have a fixer or possible other fixers if the first fixer cannot get the thing. But so far, my main fixer has not failed me. I will tell him, I'll give him a list of things. I want to go interview people in Chernobyl about when the Russians dug trenches in the Red Forest. I want to go and have a overnight embed with a drone team fighting the Russians in this area, or just FPVs generally. I want X, Y, and Z, and then he'll be like, okay. He'll check back to me in a week. He'll be like, here's the options. Here's who's it's with. We don't know exactly where it's going to be for OPSEC reasons, but it's going to be in this general region, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. They'll give me the general like ideas of what it's going to take. I'll consider like cost like how much where I'm going to stay is going to cost me, and then we head out. And then we film. And because of my military credentials, I am given approval to film over there, and it makes it very easy. My military press card, in fact, is so easy that I don't even need to deal with a visa. If I'm approved press, you can stay in the country for 365 days out of the year, when regularly you would have to leave after 90 days. And every time I leave the country, I have this experience where they'll stop me, they'll pull me out as the one foreigner, and they'll be like, you've been here way too long. They'll be like, this again. I show them the press card, and it's almost like they're frustrated. Like, damn it, almost got
We finally thought we got one to pull out this time, but it was just
exactly.
Damn it.
Slip through their fingers.
That some of what you were just talking about, and especially when we were talking about your body armor, brings to mind this kind of idea I've had. It sounds dumb probably, but when people first started describing what it was going to be like to having the Russians fight the Ukrainians as an asymmetrical force, they're like, it's probably going to seem asymmetrical. It's going to be in the city. But now it feels like it's non-Euclidean. It is the most convoluted series of tactics and battlefields I've ever seen. It's like literally every possible thing seems to be represented. We have trench warfare. We have drone warfare of every stripe. People dropping things out. The drone with the stick on it, trying to knock the spy drone out. And then house to house, street to street, and tanks and artillery and naval battles and ship to shore battles. How can you speak to the complexity of how this battlefield kind of plays out, and how the Ukrainians are dealing with it?
I speak to the complexity. Man, so obviously, like, the main problem for like 2023 and 2022, and even to now, even though I think that the Kursk operation has made me very curious about improvements in Ukrainian combined arms warfare, has been the failure of both sides to properly implement combined arms warfare. Honestly speaking, when I talk to people about 2022, the stories are the most chaotic shit you can ever imagine. Like stories about like people like literally like drunk during battle, like people like wandering into enemy positions, like they giving guns out to like literally everyone, and like there's friendly fire incidents on both sides like crazy. Even though the Russians like had a manpower problem, like they like had a communication problem. There was like a lot of so they had friendly fire incidents as well. There was instances where like, I mean, the Russians were communicating on open radio waves, and as we were streaming those early days, we were just listening to them. We're just listening to them. Go here, go there, attack this, attack that. And if you're a Ukrainian like amateur UAV operator, like amateur ham radio operator, you're listening to this and you're sending all this information Ukrainian command. There was like teenagers, like kids, like operating drones, finding Russian positions, selling it to the army, and like getting people. It was chaos. It was crazy. And so I would say that a lot of the early stuff was crucial decisions that were being made. For example, like Zelensky staying in the country, the public broadly just being a force, a mass to stop the Russian advance when they thought they were going to need, like if they started the war with 800,000 troops instead of 150,000, there's a good chance this war would have gone very differently in that chaos. But the Russians underestimated the Ukrainians, as they often did, but they also thought they were going to be facing the same army that they did in 2014 when there was only 6,000 troops that were actually combat ready, where this time it was like 150,000 to 250, I think it was about 250,000 troops, if I remember correctly. So it was chaotic, but as the war's gone on, the complexity has layered on with the introduction of new technologies like drone warfare, which has introduced a level of battlefield transparency that is both has leaves me in awe at times, but is also terrifying. I remember I was with these Mavic crews.
Can you explain what a Mavic is? I'm sorry.
A Mavic is a type of imagine like a recon drone. Not a recon, how do I describe it? A hobby drone that someone would have used to take beautiful pictures of Swiss mountaintops, instead turned into the eyes and ears of the most deadly machines known to man. That is what a Mavic drone is. These Chinese DJI drones that go out and will monitor for like 6-7 hours at a time with these little demonic buzzing sounds from these tiny little plastic motors that just reminds you of their presence every step of the way. And they're the eyes and ears of both armies. And by keeping these things constantly hovering on the front, anytime either side like builds up like a sizable force and starts to move, they get hammered because the battlefield transparency is constant. When I was with the Mavic team, they had this system where it would be 6 hours with two guys, one that would charge it and like, you know, kind of deal with the like loading and sending off. Another guy who would actually pilot it. Both of them like charging and like, doing the whole system. And they'd cover one area of the front, one stretch of the front with their Mavic drones constantly to see what the Russians would do, sending that information back to command. After 6 hours, 7-8 hours, they tap out, go to sleep, and two guys who were sleeping that entire time will then switch out with them, take up the Mavics, and then command that part of the front. And they do that for the entire front line. There are well over probably 1 million drones in the skies above Ukraine.
Is that an exaggerated figure?
For this year, the Ukrainian government is talking about producing 1.5 million drones, maybe more. And then we're talking about foreign imports as well. The Russians are making massive investments, and they're more centralized. The Ukrainians are more decentralized, but as money dries up, the main problem in Ukraine for drone production anymore isn't like, oh, we don't have the capacity. It's they don't have the money. If they had an extra $10 billion, they could probably go past it to like 2 million drones or more. I can't give you exact estimations. It's just the problem is right now a lot of the smaller drone companies, because they were very decentralized, are now being consolidated. They're going through the same thing that the American military industrial complex did after the end of the Cold War, and the money started to dry up. And now we have, you know, Lockheed Martin, Raytheon. That's what's happening in the Ukrainian drone industry right now, which on one hand, it'll be a good thing for the like centralizing these resources so they can maybe invest in the bigger projects. But on the other hand, it also means some of the advantage of the decentralization of drone production and drone innovation that was given to Ukraine are going to kind of be erased. But there's a little bit of complex. I'm doing a documentary right now. I've already finished filming it. It's now just editing it. I've embedded with every type of drone that is in Ukraine: Baba Yaga, Vampire, you know, fixed wing aircraft, grenade dropping drones, like. And I tried to understand from these crews' perspective, like, what is the future of modern drone warfare? And I'm very deeply interested in it. But the main thing to take away is the horror of complete battlefield transparency and the amount of defense economics advantage FPVs give somebody trying to fight an armored assault opponent.
Dude, so that actually goes into another, really leads into the story of the week, obviously, maybe of the year, depending on how it goes. Despite this constant surveillance, despite all of these drones, 1 million sounds crazy, but if I'll take your number right off rip. Despite all of this battlefield transparency, the Ukrainians managed to pull off a
now,
surprise
let me be clear.
attack.
When we say like 1 million drones in Ukraine, I might like, it might be like 500,000 now, but it'll be like 1 million to like 1.5 million have flown above Ukraine throughout the year. And when like, for example, if you use 10,000 FPVs in a day, right? Do those no longer count in the air? Do those no longer count for the year? I would include those 10,000 strikes in that day in my count. Gotcha. So it's like not like 1 million in the air at any one time.
So what we're saying is like,
about like
what we're saying is like 1 million drone flights per year
Not flights, drones, because one drone could fly multiple times. It's just like an FPV drone, like hitting, I would count as like one drone
Gotcha.
for the year, you know?
Okay. Yeah. Drone actions, whatever. But not literally
You can
1
call it that, I
million
guess.
drones floating at the
At one
the border.
moment, not at one moment. It'd be like,
Gotcha.
you know how Assange stream, it's not 20,000 or any big streamer, any big political streamer, and you look at the VOD afterward, it says 250,000 views, but if you tune in, it's only 10,000 views at any one time.
Only
It's
10,000.
like that.
But yeah, to continue off of that though, despite that level of transparency and these constant drone flights, Ukraine has managed to do something that nobody saw coming, and that is make an extremely serious incursion into Russian territory this week. Last I heard, it was roughly 40 kilometers past where they should have been stopped.
Can we talk about one aspect about this for a moment? I don't think I've talked
Absolutely.
about this on stream, but I wanted to mention this at some point. I guess this is a good opportunity. Nobody's talking about how much of a just disastrous like intelligence failure this is. When we talk about like October 7th and you know the people in the paragliders going over the border, they killed 1,200 people, but then they were pushed out in like 48 hours, right? The Ukrainians are now taking this land for like 10 days. Right? They're advancing. They're taking more villages. I think Koronevo might actually fall, which is it's insane to me. Gorky is under pressure, which is again insane to me. I've seen the trench. They're paying people like up to $3,000 to $4,000 just to dig a hole in Kursk. Like, and that was
like a literal like a fighting position.
That was like no, just to dig a hole. Just to dig the trenches. So I'm saying, the soldiers were getting $3,000 to $4,000 to go fight in like Bakhmut, like at like around Bakhmut like a week ago because they've increased the pay. But now they're offering that same thing just for the digging because the situation is kind of desperate when it comes to manpower.
And these are like trenches. They're just trying to like throw out the roads and stuff and like literally stop the advance by any desperate measure possible.
Yeah, it seems the Russian strategy is here, right? And I don't want to be like too like bloomer for like the Ukrainians on this because there is disadvantages. We can talk about this in a bit, but the Russians are taking troops from Kaliningrad that are there to like defend Kaliningrad in the event of war. They are taking any and all troops that are available in the region, including deploying some from the east, but not a lot, because they want to keep the pressure on the Ukrainians. They don't want Ukrainian mobilization, which has started to been enacted, to finally start kicking in into real gear when you have a lot of these guys who have already signed up in the last few months, like coming out, and then the winter setting in, making it more difficult for them to assault Ukrainian positions when they want to take Pokrovsk. They are pushing towards Pokrovsk rapidly. And if they take Pokrovsk, that's going to eliminate a really vital supply line to Konstantinivka, to Chasiv Yar, to Toretsk, to New York, the little bit of it that's still controlled by Ukraine. So it's that's what the Russians are trying to push towards. And so while on one hand, I'm kind of like, oh, the Ukrainians are gaining ground for the first time in forever, but also could those troops be used better elsewhere? It's hard to say because one could look at this attack on Kursk as putting the Russians in a dilemma as, do you deploy more troops from the east and then remove this pressure, or just let the Ukrainians run buck wild and hope that the conscripts that were never supposed to even see active combat operations and some VDV troops and the fucking Chechens are going to be able to stop some of Ukraine's most cracked troops as the Ukrainians are actively trying to pour more fuel on the fire, and we have no clue when they're going to stop, because I was hearing about redeployments from Chasiv Yar, redeployments from Toretsk, and these units that are under pressure are becoming smaller. They're not getting reinforced, they're becoming smaller, and I'm hearing complaints from them about this. I think it was the 110th that was complaining about this too, as they're getting redeployed to Kursk. So they're actively taking troops from a very vital part of the front just to pour more fuel on the fire here. So I think they're really trying to take advantage of this. This isn't something where they're just dipping their toe in and then they're going to be like, oopsie doopsie. They just announced they're going to have somebody managing occupation humanitarian resources. We got a NATO supplied state driving Humvees towards Kursk, delivering humanitarian aid to occupied Russia. This is 2024. It's a wild thing, isn't it?
Yeah. To slow down things just a second for my followers. Basically, the issue right now is that there's not a certain military.
Sorry
advantage.
if I talk too fast.
No.
I'll slow down if you want me to.
No. You're going fine. I just need to. So basically, to explain why this may be not the best thing, I'm going to say some stuff, and then if I'm wrong, please hop in. There's not a certain military advantage for crossing this border other than it's always nice to take territory, but it's not we are specifically accomplishing an objective or have gotten closer to a certain objective that everyone can say, oh, okay, you're going to take out this rail yard. Oh, okay, you're going to take out this munitions factory. Oh, okay, you're going to own these rail lines, this transportation and stuff, and that is for certain going to be worth the sacrifice a little bit further down the road. Is there something up there in Kursk that is particularly valuable other than just a soft spot in the front?
Yeah, I mean, if there is a very important nuclear reactor that powers much of the Kursk region, and while the Ukrainians, I don't think they want to like blow it up and cause like Chernobyl. It'd be like, we got you back for Chernobyl.
Mhm.
That's what this was all about from the beginning. Zelensky's whole plan. No, I think they would probably get advantage from forcing them through the striking of certain substations to have to shut down the plant because they have to exude energy for the plate. I'm not a nuclear physicist, but that energy needs to go somewhere. And so if it's not going somewhere, they have to shut it down. But if they shut it down, and if they destroy enough substations, then there's not power to the region, which not only affects the civilians, which would cause discontent in Russia, but also, importantly, supports a lot of systems. Not only Russian military system, which is in Kursk and supporting the war, transportation, rail yards, which bring a lot of troops that are being sent to the front into the Kursk region. A lot of soldiers use civilian rail lines to try to get around. And there's also some other things. For example, there are some trade routes from China all the way to Belarus that if they go far enough, they might be able to actually not only bring penalties for the Russians, but also penalties for the Belarusians, which is why I just saw Lukashenko. I'm assuming, I just saw Lukashenko in the last 24 hours saying now is the time for talks. Now is the time for negotiation. Peace is the answer. Believe in peace, So there is places that they could go. There's also air bases that if the Ukrainians, and they don't necessarily need to capture it, because I've seen Ukrainian artillery operating very close to the front.
Mhm.
I like, a lot of SPGs that usually would be taking a back seat because they want to protect these. And they're like, why is this 5 kilometers from the front? That's really weird. They could be hitting the front line from 15 kilometers away. And I think the reason why is they want to have these in position when they get just in range, so they can hit some of these targets, like, for example, some electrical substations or something along that effect.
Yeah.
And of course, there's also just there's also other angles of it, like negotiation. I'm sure people have talked about this. I'm sure you've heard about this, but the idea that if the Ukrainians take some territory here, then maybe they can renegotiate it for, Kharkiv, some territory in Kharkiv or some territory out east. And I will say that people forget this, and I made note of it at the time. But it kind of got overshadowed by the fact that it came from the Thug Shaker Discord channel. The Jack Terra leaks from that National Guardsman that wanted to impress all those people online and make him think he was not a loser in the Discord channel. Part of the stuff he leaked was included information that we gathered. I think it was either through signals intelligence, but do not count me on that. That noted that the Ukrainians were considering, or at least talking about in the government, about invading parts of Russia to capture territory to trade in negotiations. And now they're starting an occupation administration, and it's not hard to see how the Ukrainian government would try to be like, look, if you want, you can't freeze the war if we have part of your territory. How embarrassing that would be. 200,000 Russians are currently being evacuated. That's all those people just not going to return home.
So in summation, and a raw summation, because we don't know for sure, but basically this technique would be, you guys want to try to shut down the war while you're in our area, and so if we shut down, we have to negotiate for stuff that you already have while we have nothing to give back to you other than we stop shooting at you. Now,
you could say that this is the Ukrainians getting the leverage that they believe is necessary to take back territory. That is one possible explanation. There's a lot of explanations for this, but that's one possible explanation.
Is the reactor up there? This is absolute speculation on my part, but I'm just curious because you would know if anyone did that I talked to. Is that reactor that they might be able to encircle in Kursk close enough to Ukraine to just rewire electric from it to supplant the Ukrainian grid?
I would say capturing it is a whole other task. I don't even want to consider capturing it right now. That would be wild, and if they did, it would make it much more difficult, just like it's difficult for the Ukrainians to imagine taking back the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant. And I've watched that thing as battles have gone on around it. During the Kherson counteroffensive, bombs going on very near it. But of course, you're hesitant to directly bomb the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant,
which people are working at the whole time. because it's a nuclear
Yes,
power plant.
a lot of them being forced to work there, and also I believe Russian citizenship was also forced on the staff. But if they did capture it, that would mean complication for the Russians. But it's probably going to be easier, but still difficult to get within range of it and try to disable it instead of necessarily capturing it.
Gotcha. Basically, people that don't know, all power stations have to have constant output. They have to be able to burn off the energy because they make so much. But with nuclear power plants, it's especially necessary that there's a constant burn on the yield. And so if you start hitting a few substations that make it so, you lose power to a few villages, obviously, maybe even a small city, but like that needs to now go somewhere else. And so they're going to have to highly focus on getting that back up. It becomes a priority because you could have a meltdown if you don't get that under control, or you have to reduce your overall power output or stuff like that. Also not a nuclear scientist. I just saw Chernobyl once, and so now I feel like I'm an expert is really what it is.
Amen. It's a good series. I want to go to Chernobyl. I want to go.
You're gonna go to was it Pripyat and ride the long abandoned Ferris wheel?
Ride it. I mean, I want to see some of those animals that are affected by the mutation. But my main thing is I want to do a story about the Russians that dug trenches in the Red Forest.
Oh, yeah,
I want to get some pictures and videos of it. I want to talk to people about it. Because the mayor of Chernobyl, he was like tortured by I believe it was the mayor of Chernobyl. He was like tortured by the Russians. He had his hands broken. It was awful. And they like brought him out into the Red Forest, and they were digging in the Red Forest. And he's the mayor of Chernobyl, so he's like, "What the fuck are you doing? You're digging in the Red Forest, the most irradiated part of Chernobyl."
Yeah.
And he just stood there after being beaten and had his like bones broken, and he just let them dig, didn't tell them, and he would accept radiation for himself because hey, at least they're getting irradiated.
That is such a like Russian thing.
I was told that story from Anastasia, by the way. So maybe she's my into Chernobyl. I got two paths I'm thinking of.
Very impressive though. So yeah. Oh yeah. One thing, the initial reactions to Kursk suggest it's actually one of the most mobile, very fast moving operations that Ukraine has done in a while. It's vehicles. They're cooking. I've seen the Ukrainians. It was said that they were special forces. Who knows? But I saw them from the grenade drones that were thankfully missing them as they were trying to grenade them, and they were going through checkpoints, just blowing through. But there's not been a lot of resistance of any value in that area. Do you know about that, or could you speak to that?
Oh, you mean like how is there so much like SOF raids at nighttime, like through a lot of the positions, like way past where the front line is in Kursk?
But basically, to rephrase, sorry, they're moving quick. Really, they're not getting stopped the way that they are in the rest of the border. And is that because the Ukrainian units are particularly good? A mix of the Russians are bad?
It's a combination of factors. Well, the first thing is that the Ukrainians did dedicate some elite units to this. Now, they also took units that were supposed to be guarding the border of Belarus and redeployed them into the Sumy area. And I talked about how much of an intelligence failure this was for Russia. Well, what happened was that the Russians did do some raids across into Sumy with some Chechen guys that raised a flag. It didn't go anywhere. They lost some few guys. They died. Nothing came of it. But they did that in the area, and so when the Ukrainians started deploying troops in the area, now this is this is me opining on the issue. I want to mark that and make that clear. I'm not breaking points. I got to keep some integrity here.
Yeah.
So, I think that what happened, or what I would think what happened, is that because they did those raids. And because there was the expansion of the war, an escalation. I don't like how people don't talk about their escalations. It's only the Ukrainian, the Western escalation. But their escalation of expanding the war and trying to invade into the Kharkiv area again, they thought maybe, those troops are just there for defensives, for defensive positions in the Sumy Oblast in case they would cross the border and invade there and do another expansion. But they weren't. They were building up forces for their own offensive, and there was just not enough Russian soldiers across the border defending their positions. They broke through two lines. The border guards weren't able to stop them. And then the troops that they quickly tried to throw over, the Chechens and a lot of conscripts, either ran away or hundreds of them were captured. Mm-hmm. And I know hundreds of them are captured because I've seen the videos, and it's very clear hundreds of them. In one picture, there's like 102 of them captured. Currently, the governments are saying it's hundreds. I heard some rumors that it was thousands, but earlier, and I talked about it, but I think it's probably still in the hundreds. But still, like, there just wasn't enough. A lot of them got captured because they were never supposed to see active combat in the first place. And ever since, the Russians have been trying to redeploy troops quickly, and the advance has slowed down from the Ukrainians. But they have captured some more village recently. They're trying to put new pressure on Kornevo, which is an important location from the south and the east. They're still doing SOF raids. They're still doing HIMARS strikes. They're dedicating aerial resources. French hammer bombs are hitting in the area. The Ukrainians still have significant air defense in the area, which was very helpful when the Russians try to respond with air power. So that's the current situation as the Russians continue to redeploy. So it seems at the moment the Russians are trying to see if they can stop them without removing pressure, and the Ukrainians continue to dump in resources to try to continue to inch forward and find new breakthroughs, not only in Kursk, but also in Belgorod as well. The issue is expanding as the Ukrainians are now doing more raids over the border, trying to capture villages, and the Russians are trying to hold there, which means they're not only having to redeploy troops in the Kursk, which will become more difficult as the Ukrainians bomb railway lines and try to take them over, but they're also trying to redeploy them into the Belgorod region. But these advances will become more difficult, likely, as time goes on and the Russians do redeploy more, if they make those decisions to redeploy. But that's up to the Kremlin, and if they can scrounge around enough people who maybe are not of the best to stop them, because you're gonna need like five not quality guys for one quality guy. Like, I don't know how to do the math 1-to-1, but the point is, some soldiers are better than others. And
they weren't there. That was an area they didn't have a whole lot of concern for. The Russians didn't. That just kind of speaking of not great guys. Before I start stuttering again, they are being wrapped up, hundreds, maybe thousands at the most extraordinary estimation. There's always going to be the one guy that goes around saying, like, I saw 10,000 dudes in handcuffs, and they're like, we don't own 10,000 handcuffs, but thank you very much, Yuri. What is the processing plan for Ukrainian captured Russian POWs? Do they come back? Do you guys have or do they have, sorry, not you guys, but do they have detention camps over there, or do they go to the normal prisons? How do you deal with 10,000 guys, or 1,000 guys even captured?
JP, thank you so much for the $2. I appreciate that. Go where the mines and obstacles aren't. That's also the big thing, and I do want to deviate from this question for a moment, because this is really important, because from my conversations, I've filmed with the mining crews around Balaklia and the Kharkiv Oblast as they were trying to clear civilian areas. There's TM62 mines everywhere. There's PMF1 butterfly mines, which should never be used, in my opinion, because they're evil. If you know what the type of mine I'm talking about.
Is that a cluster munition?
The little green ones that look like toys almost. The Soviets used them heavily in Afghanistan, and then children, not knowing they were mines, because they're just like tiny green plastic, like almost ball. They look like toys. They pick them up and they blow off their arm, and they're designed not to kill you, but just to maim you. And so these things I've seen these things like within like 15 meters, 20 meters of like old babushkas' homes in Balaklia. There's TM62 tank mines like all over like farmers' fields, and farmers who aren't getting support are deciding to remove it on their own, because it's keep your farm or not keep your farm, and for a lot of these people trying to manage the little bit of wealth they have under such immense pressure. And it's a major issue. And so when you imagine the amount of mines that have been placed here, when 33, I think 1/3 of the country is covered in mines, largest country in Europe, more mines in Ukraine than any other country in the world now. From my conversations with the mining crews, they talk about doing this for the next 80 to 100 years before you really seriously like, oh, we're starting to get mine free. We're starting to really clear them all away. Now, compare that to a bunch of areas and a bunch of villages that have no mines in them, that don't have these defensive structures that have been built, and are not completely pockmarked, and roads aren't just like burnt heaps that used to resemble roads, which meant that it was also a lot easier for them to drive around. And if like they don't take a village, they can just go around the village, where in Donetsk, that's a lot more difficult.
Yeah. Just
but the question about processing prisoners.
Oh yeah, please.
Sorry, I don't want to interrupt you, but you wanted to answer to that.
Go ahead.
Right now, the Ukrainian government just announced that they will only do now an all-for-all deal for these new prisoners captured, meaning they want all of the Azov guys from Azovstal returned. They want women and children. I don't know if they said children, but it was children, no, it was women and civilians as well, and they want to do like an all-for-all trade. And considering a lot of these guys are conscripts that were never supposed to see action in the first place, and the conscripts are overwhelmingly young, you're gonna be talking about people like 22, 23, and their moms never signed up for this. These guys never signed up to be part of Ukraine. That gives them a lot more leverage. And I just heard from a Ukrainian government source that actually the Russians have accepted to talk about this, and they're actually negotiating it after the Russians have kept prisoner swaps and negotiations. Like, they've been kind of boycotting it for a bit to make a point. Or it's hard to say exactly why they do it. We don't know for sure, but I think it's to make a point. But that's me opining. Let me be clear. As for what the Ukrainians have to process them, they have facilities. They're basically like prison. I mean, like, I was gonna say prison camps, but they don't. They're not like breaking rocks with hammers. But they're like, they eat 3 meals a day. They sleep in a bed. The Red Cross gets access to them, which they don't get access to any of the Russian prisons. And so they monitor them. And there does not seem to be any reports of widespread abuse to the level of in Russia. Of course, there is stories of, instances when prisoners were trying to get captured, of like somebody going for a gun and getting shot and another person getting shot with them. And there's stories of abuses. But in Russia, the UN says that like 90 to 95% of all prisoners are tortured. If you go through the Russian detainment system, even as a civilian, you're not a prisoner of war, there's a big threat of torture. In Ukraine, that type of system of abuse is not systemic in the same way, but there, of course, are still cultural problems. And if there's any abuse, I believe, of course, it should be prosecuted to the full extent of the law.
And so you have Red Cross as a third-party observer there, and I'm guessing
yes,
if you
which
know,
the Ukrainians hate the Red Cross. I do want to be clear about that.
Everybody hates the Red Cross if they have to fight with the Red Cross.
They don't like the lack of access into Russia. They don't like some of the opining about Ukraine. But yeah, they don't like the Red Cross. I don't think I've met a Ukrainian that likes the Red Cross. It's good that they monitor the Ukrainian prisons. I just, like everybody else, wish they had access to the Russian prisons. And sometimes I feel like their language is very neutralish in order to try to maybe appeal to the Russians to get access. But then we don't get the access, and then you don't get sometimes you can't take action, but sometimes you don't even get the decisive language. And I think that's some of the vibe I get from the discontent about it.
Yeah, I mean, that kind of has been oh my gosh, I did not see an arm coming. I'm not even in your house. That scared the shit out of me for some reason, though. That does seem to be a pretty
unexpected.
Yes, that seems to be a pretty consistent when it comes to messaging with Russia, Ukraine. You hit on it before. It's definitely here, even with the Red Cross. But it seems that Ukraine, with its borders being open by necessity to the West, to NATO, they have a lot of observers, third party and otherwise, who are in Ukraine observing Ukrainian actions. And Ukraine is under scrutiny way, way, way more extreme than Russia. Everyone gives Russians are bad guys, Russians are this, Russians are that. But you often do see a single Ukrainian action, the Kursk specifically, will be picked apart kind of relentlessly about how dumb it was, how smart it was, this, that, and the other. Whereas, Russia gets to be a sort of black box that's vaguely threatening in its aura, but is treated like such a natural occurrence that it's kind of like it couldn't be doing anything different. But Ukraine, if you just did this, if you just did that, maybe we could switch things up for you. Maybe you could fix this issue.
It is kind of baffling. Like, for example, we're not hearing this much commentary about how much of an intelligence failure it was that they weren't able to find out, with the amount of battlefield transparency that exists, with them making note of Ukrainian troop increases, with it just being a vulnerable part of the front, and maybe putting 2 and 2 together. Or maybe it was just like a lack of communication, like somebody saw something but they didn't want to like worry command. Who knows what it was? But whatever it was a failure, and the Russians seem to acknowledge this because they're starting to go on a little tiny purge, and we don't know much about it yet, but they are trying to find someone who is responsible, because somebody has to be responsible for this if in 3 months the Ukrainians still hold like a ton of villages and some small cities in the Kursk region. So it is a failure. Another thing that doesn't get talked about a lot is the Ukrainian victory in the Black Sea and being able to
which was extraordinary, by the way.
Extraordinary.
Extraordinary.
using those USVs, those Sea Baby drones, stuffing them with explosives and ramming them into the ships, disabling 30 to 40 to like 50% of the Black Sea Fleet, allowing them to reopen the grain corridor so they can start agricultural products moving into international markets again, which not only helped Ukraine but also helped stabilize international food prices. So it was a win-win for everybody except the Russians. There's also, of course, like, I mean, there's a lot of tiny victories that the Ukrainians I don't think get enough credit for, and there's a lot of failures that the Russians I don't think get enough critique for. But also, I will say that somebody who's in the, I talk to more pro-Ukraine people than more pro-Russian people. I do sometimes worry, like, for example, the amount of bloomerism about Kursk covering up the amount of pressure that's on Toretsk and Chasiv Yar as the Russians continue to, add the pressure. And so I don't ever want, like, a acknowledgement that the Russians' failures are not documented enough, and that people have this aura of invincibility around the Russians, including leading political figures, that is fairy tale-ish at best, as if you're talking about like John Henry, like a force from a old folksy tale that can't be defeated, instead of an actual country that has problems and has lost wars within the last 30 years. So the idea that they can't lose another one is kind of preposterous. But there's also, of course, on the other end, those who believe that Ukraine's victory is inevitable and they have their own delusions.
Gotcha. Kind of a universality when it comes to warfare. There's a lot of people that want to be excessively positive and excessively negative, and everyone else is sort of stuck in the middle, and no one agrees how positive or negative is the right way to be. But when it comes to kind of making your predictions or assessments, I guess you would say, when you look at the next 6 months for Dylan Burns, the next 6 months for Ukraine, what does that look like for you as we approach, Ukraine 2025, Ukraine post-American election? It's been another big year for them every year that we've gone through, but this might be one of the biggest Januaries that the Ukrainians are going to experience, depending on what happens between now and then.
Sorry, I was trying to smoke. I'm back in a legal state. Could you ask me that question again?
Yeah. No problem. So basically, we talked a lot about all the stuff that's going on. This is a pretty crazy next 6 months. I think I came up with this question when it wasn't August. I'm a fucking idiot. But basically, as we push towards January of 2025, we're going to go through the American election, which is extremely important to the people of Ukraine, because one side of our country will go one way and the other side will go a very different way.
It's so weird being out there, having people be like, so that Kamala Harris, huh? And it's like a soldier, like a mortar team, like on the Lipsky, like the Russians are 2 miles away, and we're talking about like Kamala Harris and her like Ukraine policy. I'm being asked about that. And I remember somebody like was making fun on Twitter a while ago of somebody saying like Ukrainian soldiers scrolling on Twitter worrying about America's Congress and what they'll do, and people were like laughing about the idea, but that is real. That's not real. They're not literally like crying over like Nancy Pelosi's like putting like her fist up for Ukraine or something. They're not all like blue wave, they're not chanting that or something. But they do pay attention because of course their future is dependent on them getting supplies. And if you're a Ukrainian soldier, like in an artillery team, if you don't get those foreign artillery shipments, you don't have ammunition to defend your buddies. You don't have ammunition to defend yourself. And if you're a mortar team, the guys who are defending infantry, that's like their main job, to support infantry, you can't do that. And then therefore their buddies are more likely to die. The Russians will be more aggressive with their attacks, and so they have a lot of personal stake. And part of the reason I was interested in foreign affairs in the first place and streaming about foreign affairs is I feel like a lot of times Americans don't realize how much influence they have on the world stage, and they make decisions about world affairs very hastily. And I think that's part of the reason why I'm upset at the lack of knowledge of our commitments that we made to Ukraine around the Budapest Memorandum and them giving up those security guarantees in response for our security and our concerns about nuclear proliferation and some probably corrupt, general giving a nuke to Osama bin Laden, and then it's an atom bomb in New York instead of 2 planes. Of course, I'm being a little hyperbolic here, but you get the point.
And so, as these months ahead are coming down the pipeline, do you have any projects specifically that you're going to hit? Obviously, you talked about the people digging out in the Red Forest and stuff, but what's coming up for you? You got a demining crew documentary also for everybody out there. Just released a documentary.
I filmed that like a year and a half ago. I haven't released the footage because I've just been so busy, and it's I live with them for a month, so I have a month's like it's hard enough to like edit and add commentary and get source material and fact check for like 5, 6, 7 days of footage. Like that can take months depending on how much you have to go through, how much fact checking you need to do, independent interviews with those who were with you at the time so they could describe what it was like from their experience. Like I just released a documentary, The Unevacuatables. It was like that, but a month I have no clue how long it's gonna take me. So that's like on the back burner. I'll do that when I have the time. So in the meantime, I know this Sunday I'm releasing a documentary from, I guess you can call it a documentary, but it's an 19-minute video, 19-minute video of me spending 24 hours in a Donetsk stabilization point. I was in the Donetsk region filming them as they did surgeries. We filmed about 5 or 6 of them, and we got to interview medical staff about the experience of supporting some of the troops fighting the hottest part of the front. They were part of the 66 Mechanized Brigade. That's one of the patches I don't have the wall because I forgot in Ukraine, but I'll bring it back eventually. I'm also going to be releasing a mortar team mission. We were just talking about that mortar team. I'm going to be releasing that as well, probably towards the end of this month or the start of next month. I'm going to be releasing a drone documentary way in the future, but that's like towards maybe the end of this year, maybe a few months into the future, because I filmed with all the drone teams, like I said. But as for what I'm going to do for the rest of this year, it's going to be hopefully doing a piece about stores on the front line. The people who were like selling food to the people within a kilometer of the Russians and keeping these villages like somewhat alive. Ask them why they're doing it, what it's like to live near the front line. I see them sweeping broken glass, and that just fascinates me that they continue to stay there, because it's usually when those stores go away that the village dies, because without an inflow of aid and people crazy enough to bring in water to these frontline villages, they get strangled more and more and more. And that's not even talking about financial pressures. So that's one thing I'm going to do. I also, there's some stuff I can't talk about, but will become evident probably in the next few months. I'm trying to think what else. I want to do a few interviews with Ukrainians, ask them about American politics, because I feel like there's a lot of opining from American commentators with very little knowledge, and maybe having like American politicians, like policies and ideas about Ukraine getting reacted to by the people whose lives will be impacted by those policies might be beneficial. And so having them react to what Trump has said about the war, what Biden has said about the war, and his record as Biden, a beautiful, beautiful president, goes into the sunset, Scranton Joe, and of course Kamala Harris. I want to do that too. There's a few other things, but I can't remember them all right now.
Gotcha. One of the last ones is the Hippie Dippy is coming back.
Yes,
up here
Hippie
soon.
Dippy is coming back. I have the same problem every time on every single show. People are like asking me like, "So Dylan, what you doing next?" And it's like, war thing. I'm gonna release this Pokrovsk article with offbeat research, yada yada yada. And then it's like, and also I'm on your show tomorrow. Oh yeah, you are on my show tomorrow. Yes, Destiny, you're right. You are on the show. You are on the Hippie Dippy podcast this Friday at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time is the undercard, and then 8:30 p.m. is the main event.
Yes, I am not on this one. I don't think I'm on.
No, you are not
Sunday,
on this one.
next Sunday, I think, or something. I don't know.
Next Sunday.
Yeah.
I got confused. I thought it was today because I've been like running at like 100 miles an hour, and I tweeted out like, Hippie Dippy roundtable tonight, and Danabo was like, "Dylan, you fucking moron." But yeah, no. That's gonna be August 25th. Is the Hippie Dippy recruitment channel. The purpose of that is to take people who haven't been on big panel shows before and are more smaller content creators and give them a chance to interact in the space, give them a chance to try out the format, give them a chance to get their footing. And we don't have a host for the show yet because Danabo is taking more hours at work and he's still editing, so he's got too much of a burden. He cannot host recruitment, and so we're trying to find who the new host is going to be. And Westside Tyler is the first person to guest host as we try to consider our options and see if he is a wise investment.
It's really just because I'm gonna listen to it anyway, and this way I can tell people to shut up and get back on topic.
It'll be fun.
Yeah. That's pretty much wrapping up the interview with questions I have. I said I'd get you for an hour or almost at an hour. Is there anything you want to throw in at the end here? Ways that people can support you, ways that people can support the fight in Ukraine, anything like that?
Oh, sure. If you want to support me, you could donate on my website, dylanburns.tv. That's the most direct way to support me. If you want to support me on Patreon, Dylan Burns TV on Patreon, all of that everything you give me goes towards on the ground freelance war journalism, paying fixers, paying for gasoline, trying to buy new body armor, which I'm mostly soft padding is what I want to invest in around my groin because I like to keep my cock and balls, and I appreciate that. And anything else that's necessary for us to get it done, like just the costs of the job. And so if you want to support freelance on the ground war journalism, you can donate there. As for content you want to check out, I just released the documentary like 11 days ago, The Unevacuatables, on YouTube. It's absolutely free. It's about the people who wait on the front line and those crazy enough to try to get them out.
Mm-hmm. Well, that about wraps up our time. Thank you so much for making a quick hour for me while you're on your way back to a war zone. I'm going to let you go for the night. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, once again. Dylan Burns, host of the Hippie Dippy, Ukraine warrior journalist, and creator, director, producer of the Unevacuatables, which I said without stuttering, and I'm actually very proud of myself now.
Yes,
Thank you very
did.
much.
Thank
Dylan.
you very much. See, it's not a real word, but that means I have the monopoly.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, man.
You have a good one, man.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Okay, everybody. I hope you guys had a good time. Hope you guys had a good time watching that. I had a very good time. I think that was a really solid one. Activate. Blah. Yes. Okay, cool. Thanks again to Dylan Burns for popping through and having that. I've got to make myself a. Oh my God! Why did it turn off here too? What the heck? Oh, it's turned off. There we go. Yeah, cool. That was the interview yet again. Thank you to Dylan. Thanks to Danabo for setting that up for me. I should have told him if he's got anything else, you can always, I would love to talk to him again. I'll probably hit him up maybe in a couple months or something when he's on the other side of some projects, if he's got anything coming out. So we're gonna hit this unpause alerts. Come on, Gorps. Hope you enjoyed your time.